Welcome to the Thinking Stack. Let's get straight to the bone with you, shall we? We're diving deep today into a question that, well, it might leave a mark, especially if you're in or around advanced education. In this age of AI, this rapidly evolving landscape, is the PhD? Is it becoming obsolete?
It's a tough question. Almost feels wrong to ask it in some academic holes, doesn't
Mhm.
it? But looking at what we found, it's a conversation we really can't duck anymore. The blunt take that keeps coming up is this pretty unsettling idea that we might be, producing doctors for a system that doesn't want them.
Oof. Yeah, think about what that means for someone right now, deep in a program, or even just thinking about applying.
Exactly.
The PhD used to be, well, the absolute peak, the gold standard. But the ground feels like it's shifting under our feet now. The research we've looked at suggests this degree it might be offering increasingly shaky returns, especially for that traditional academic career path.
The odds just aren't great.
Not at all. Which is why today this isn't just a polite chat. We're doing what we call a systems autopsy. We need to really get under the hood.
All right. And we're using our integrated thinking stack for that. Think of it like a seven-layer tool to really dissect what's going on here, the structures, the assumptions.
Hey, let's jump right in. Layer one, cognitive cleanse. The big question here. What's actually true, not what I wish, fear, or assume? Let's
Yeah.
try and strip away the historical baggage and just look at the PhD now.
Well, the sources really don't hold back on this. The PhD model we know, it came out of 19th century Germany.
Right.
And its main job back then, simple, create university professors.
Right.
But think about it, that core design hasn't fundamentally changed much, has it?
Not really, no.
Yet the world, technology, jobs, global connections, it's all been completely transformed. Doesn't that seem like a pretty major disconnect?
It really does. Like running ancient software on a supercomputer. And that original pipeline, the reason it was built, getting a professorship, that's just not the main destination anymore for most grads. The numbers are, well, pretty brutal.
They are stark. There was that 2015 study, I think it was in Nature. It found fewer than 20% of PhD grads in the U.S. land a tenure-track job within 3 to 5 years.
Less than 1 in 5. After all that work, what does that tell you about the system's capacity to even absorb its own product?
Exactly. And it's not just a U.S. thing.
No, definitely not. I saw something about the UK too, especially in science.
Yeah, the Royal Society report back in 2010. For science PhDs in the UK, only about 3.5% end up becoming permanent academic researchers.
3.5%. You've got to be kidding.
It's incredibly low.
Think about the years, the effort, the money, the sheer personal sacrifice for those kinds of odds. Does that feel like a system that's working properly?
It really makes you question what the point of the PhD is now, in its current form. If the original goal isn't realistic for most, what is it for? And that's even before we bring AI into the picture.
Which we absolutely have to. AI isn't just, another tech tool. It feels like a fundamental shift. Think about the grunt work of a PhD start. Literature reviews.
Oh God, the lit reviews. Weeks, months sometimes.
Right. But now, sources say AI tools, things like ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, they can summarize a 30-paper literature review in under 5 minutes.
Under 5 minutes.
It's not just faster, it changes the whole value equation of that early work, doesn't it? What used to take months is now almost instant. So what's the unique human skill we expect now?
Precisely. It totally resets the value of that skill.
Yeah.
Synthesizing huge amounts of info. That was a hallmark of scholarship. Now AI does it faster, maybe even better sometimes. And it's not just reviews.
Yeah.
These tools can draft research proposals, find references.
Analyze data too, right?
Yep.
Using things like Wolfram Alpha or these RG-enhanced LLMs.
Exactly.
And just so everyone's clear, those RH models, they're AI that can pull in fresh, up-to-date info while they work, so they're analyzing with current knowledge.
So they're not just spitting back old stuff, they're actively doing tasks. Synthesis, abstraction, finding patterns that used to be purely human, high-level researcher work.
Yeah.
And the fallout from that is huge. If AI can automate big chunks of what made a PhD valuable, the synthesis, the abstraction, iterating ideas, even presenting them clearly, then the whole value proposition is being fundamentally questioned.
Which leads us to that first, pretty blunt conclusion from the sources.
Yeah. We are mass-producing scholars for a world that no longer exists.
Ouch. Hard to argue with when you see the stats and the speed of AI development.
It really is.
And it forces us to look at the ethics, the fairness of the system itself. Which brings us neatly to layer two, moral intelligence. The question here, what's the right thing here now for everyone affected? Let's look past the shiny image. Who's really winning in the current setup? And maybe more importantly, who's paying the price?
Okay, let's follow the money and the power. Who benefits well? Universities, definitely. They get the prestige, the high rankings globally, the research grant money.
And publications, right? Lots of papers from one PhD student boosts their metrics.
Absolutely. A single student can contribute to several papers. It fuels the machine. But is that machine always serving the student's best interest? That's the ethical question.
It's fine line. And then there are the faculty.
Yep. The sources mention the benefits for them too. Teaching help, cheap lab labor.
And co-authorships, sometimes maybe without a huge amount of input.
That's flagged too. It highlights a potential power imbalance. PhD students can become essentially highly skilled but very inexpensive labor. The co-author thing can get tricky, create dependencies, needs real oversight.
Definitely. And don't forget governments.
Right. They love to point to growing PhD numbers as proof of STEM investment or a thriving innovation policy.
It's a nice number to put in a report.
Looks good. But does it translate to good jobs or well-being for those grads? We've seen the numbers. Probably not for most. So, innovation for whom? And at what cost to the people doing the training?
Which brings us right back to who pays the price?
And overwhelmingly, it seems to be the student.
The money alone can be brutal.
Absolutely. Sources mention that UK PhD stipends, something like £15,000 to £20,000 a year.
Yeah, I saw that, which, let's be honest, in many places is below minimum wage for what's basically a full-time, high-stress professional job. How is that okay?
It's really stark. And the U.S. isn't always much better, proportionally. PhD students at public universities, working maybe 50-plus hours a week, earning under $30,000 a year, often with minimal benefits, no job security past their funding.
Is that sustainable? Is it ethical? How are we nurturing future leaders like that?
You really have to ask.
And it's not just the money, is it? It's the personal cost.
Huge personal cost. Years of your life, intense pressure, uncertainty, isolation.
For what? For statistically terrible odds of getting the job the system was designed for.
Which leads straight to that second mic drop line from the sources.
Yeah, this one hits hard. If you extract more than you empower, it's not education. It's exploitation with a diploma.
That really cuts deep, doesn't it? Forces a hard look at the ethics.
It really does, and it makes us think about the future, about where this is all headed. Which takes us to layer 3. Systemic foresight. The question now is, what happens next and to whom? We know the present is shaky. What about the future?
And one of the biggest factors here is the speed difference. AI is moving at lightning speed, while academia, well, it tends to move more deliberately.
Deliberately is one word for it. Glacial might be another sometimes.
Fair point. Look at China, for instance. Their PhD output is massive, over 60,000 PhDs back in 2018 alone, which was double the U.S. rate then, and heavily focused on AI, engineering, applied sciences.
That's a huge shift in the global R&D landscape, right? The White House AI talent report flagged this too.
Definitely signals a potential power shift in innovation.
Right.
And it's not just countries, it's companies. These big AI labs, DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic, they're hiring differently.
How so?
They're grabbing people directly from places like Kaggle, GitHub, from focused AI boot camps. They're looking less at the traditional PhD paper trail.
And more at actual demonstrated skills, portfolios, projects.
Exactly. Practical ability is becoming the key currency.
Which suggests that cutting-edge research might be decoupling from the standard PhD path.
It seems that way. And then there's the whole academic publishing cycle.
Oh yeah, the infamous peer review timeline. 6 months, 12 months, sometimes longer.
In fields like AI or biotech, that's an eternity. The research can be almost out of date by the time it's published.
Meanwhile, the AI world is pumping out preprints and white papers almost weekly.
Right. It's a totally different speed of sharing knowledge, which makes you wonder how traditional journals keep up. And this speed gap creates unintended side effects.
Like credential inflation. Seeing jobs that used to be fine with a bachelor's, now asking for a master's or PhD.
Exactly. Is it because the job truly needs it? Or is it just PhD oversupply pushing grads into other fields and raising the bar artificially? The sources lean towards the latter.
So the PhD itself gets devalued in some ways. Becomes just a baseline ticket to entry.
Could be. And there's the risk of hollowing out the intellectual ecosystem.
Yeah.
Talented people getting fed up with academia.
Either jumping ship to industry for better pay and conditions, or just burning out completely.
Which is a huge loss of intellectual capital.
Right.
And the final twist is AI co-authorship.
Right. How do journals like Springer Nature even handle citing GPT tools?
It's a massive headache for them. But it's more than just citation style, isn't it? It's a fundamental epistemic shift. What does authorship even mean when AI is involved?
Who gets the credit? What counts as an original contribution? Big, big question.
Profound questions, yeah. No easy answers. It just shows how deeply AI is changing the game, which brings us to the conclusion for this layer. It's a powerful analogy.
Let's hear it.
Academia is still playing chess. AI is writing the rules for quantum Go.
Wow. Yeah, that paints a picture. Being outpaced, maybe even outthought by something operating on a whole different level.
Exactly.
Which makes us turn inward. Layer 4, embodied awareness. Here we ask, what am I wired for and how does that distort my decisions? What are the human biases, the psychological drivers, affecting how we see the PhD?
Well, one big one is just the basic human desire for status. Let's be real. Having Dr. Igmilla before your name, it carries weight, credibility, cultural proof of intelligence, as the sources put it.
Sure, there's definitely a perceived value there. But the question is, what's the personal cost of chasing that status? Is it worth the time, the money, the stress?
Especially the stress. The mental health toll is undeniable. That Nature survey finding 36% of PhD students sought help for anxiety or depression, that's huge, more than a third.
It's not just a few struggling individuals. It points to something systemic in the PhD environment itself.
It really does. And the sources emphasize that burnout isn't just feeling tired, it's a real biological state.
Oh, so?
It involves things like cortisol overload, adrenal fatigue, your emotions getting out of whack, even losing your sense of self. It's not weakness, it's your body reacting to chronic, unsustainable stress.
And the sources connect this to our basic nervous system threat response, right? The constant uncertainty about funding, career, research direction, plus the isolation and lack of control.
It keeps you in a low-level fight-or-flight mode. Your nervous system basically reads the PhD environment as a constant threat.
Which can lead to these trauma loops they mentioned, cycles of anxiety.
Precisely. Your body is screaming that something's wrong, that the environment isn't safe or supportive.
Which makes the conclusion for this layer incredibly potent.
Yeah. Burnout isn't weakness. It's a full-body protest against a life that no longer fits.
That reframes it completely. Not personal failure, but a physical response to a potentially broken system.
A necessary reframing, I think.
Absolutely. And it leads directly into layer 5, human-centered design. The question becomes, how do real people behave, not idealized ones? Because it seems the PhD model assumes a kind of superhuman resilience.
It really does. It often seems built on the idea that pure intrinsic motivation will somehow overcome everything else. Bad mentorship, fuzzy expectations, financial stress, loneliness.
But that's just not how most humans operate, is it? Anyone who's been through it knows motivation waxes and wanes, especially under pressure.
Exactly. Basic learning science tells us we need things like good feedback loops, feeling psychologically safe, having social incentives.
Things that traditional PhD programs often lack. It often feels more like an endurance test.
Go trial by fire, yeah. And research backs this up. The APA links isolation, ambiguity, and lack of agency directly to cognitive collapse, serious mental distress.
And sadly, those are conditions many PhD students face.
Which might explain the attrition rates. That MIT data suggesting 30 to 50% dropout, that's massive.
A huge waste of talent and time, and the reasons. Usually things like bad mentorship, unclear goals, no clear career path. Human factors.
It points to a big mismatch between the system's design and human needs. And it's not just students inside the system noticing. You've got thinkers like Naval Ravikant or Tim Ferriss openly questioning the ROI of formal academia now.
Right. When knowledge is becoming so much more accessible elsewhere through different channels, they're pushing for alternative ways to learn deeply and build skills.
It challenges that old assumption that the multi-year PhD is the only way to real expertise or impact.
Which brings us to another sharp conclusion for this layer.
This one's pointed. Rigor without care is just cruelty with a dress code.
Oof. It highlights the potential harm when academic standards overshadow basic human well-being.
It really does. Puts the ethics front and center again.
So where does that leave us in terms of future-proofing? Layer 6, risk and resilience. Now we have to face the what-ifs. What if we're wrong or the world changes? How adaptable is this model, really?
What if our basic assumptions about the PhD's lasting value are just wrong? What if AI does eat academic labor? What if the job market does fully devalue the credential? What if online modular credentials do take over?
Can the traditional PhD compete if those things happen? How resilient is it?
These aren't just thought experiments. They feel like real possibilities now. And the data on current trends isn't exactly reassuring. That Strata study finding only 26% of U.S. employers think higher ed prepares students well for the workforce. That's a huge gap.
A massive disconnect between academia's self-perception and employer needs. It suggests the skills being taught might not be hitting the mark.
And we see companies acting on this. Google, IBM, Tesla.
Yeah.
Dropping degree requirements for more and more roles.
They're focusing on skills, experience, problem-solving ability instead of just the diploma.
Which directly threatens the PhD's value outside academia. If top employers don't require it, what's the real ROI for the student, given the huge investment of time and money?
Especially with those uncertain academic job prospects we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Which lands us at the rather bleak conclusion for this layer. We're building expertise for a job market that won't exist and calling it resilience.
Wow. That implies a kind of dangerous denial, clinging to the old ways while the ground shifts.
A stark warning, definitely. Highlights the urgent need for adaptation.
Okay, so after all that autopsy, all that critique, what do we do? Layer 7, execution engine. The crucial question, how do we act and adapt starting now? What are the concrete steps?
Well, the sources offer some really interesting ideas for rebuilding, not just tinkering. First up, modular PhDs, breaking it down. Instead of one giant degree, offer stackable micro-credentials in specific things. Methods, ethics,
Yeah.
systems thinking, AI literacy, and crucially, build in valuable exit points. Get a recognized credential after year 1, year 3, whatever, not all or nothing.
That makes so much sense. Addresses the sunk cost problem, gives people flexibility and usable skills along the way. What else?
Redesigning the outputs, moving beyond the massive dissertation as the only valid endpoint.
Okay, like what?
Accepting things like books, startups, apps, data platforms, policy designs as legitimate scholarly work. Recognizing different ways research can have impact.
So broadening the definition of valuable scholarly contribution?
Exactly. It could encourage more applied, real-world focused work.
And the third piece.
Rewiring the training itself. Get PhDs out of just the university bubble, embed them in real-world labs, civic tech groups, climate action initiatives, product design firms, places tackling actual problems.
So train generalists with deep thinking skills, but also adaptability and an impact focus.
That's the idea. Cultivate leaders who can think deeply and act effectively. Bridge that gap between theory and practice.
Which brings us full circle to that final, powerful conclusion.
Yeah, this sums it up. The world doesn't need more dissertations. It needs builders who think like philosophers and move like designers.
That really captures the shift, doesn't it? Not abandoning deep thought, but channeling it towards building, towards solving, towards designing better systems.
Exactly.
So wrapping this up, it's crucial to stress, as the sources do, this isn't about bashing deep learning itself.
Not at all. It's about looking hard at how we deliver that learning, how we nurture that talent, especially now with AI changing everything.
It's a call for a serious redesign, retooling the PhD for this century, an era that demands agility, cross-disciplinary work, ethical intelligence, and real impact.
Because the deepest learning, the sources argue, isn't static. It's adaptive. It's human-centered. It shouldn't just live in dissertations on a shelf.
Right.
Which leaves a big question for you listening right now. How are you approaching deep learning? Are your methods, your structures, really serving your goals in this new world?
Something important to chew on. And speaking of thought-provoking, our next deep dive tackles something completely different, but just as deep. Are we living in a post-soul world?
Ooh, intriguing.
Should be fascinating. So if this conversation sparked something for you, please hit follow, hit share. Let's get these ideas circulating.
Or, maybe even better, hit pause. Especially if you're staring at that PhD application form. Take a real moment. Think hard about what you actually want to build, and is this the best way to get there right now?
Stay real, stay radical, stay rigorously thoughtful.